What can be stated with certainty is that this individual, with or without a backpack, was present at that residence on January 11th. In 52 days, this sprawling investigation has yielded no arrests, no publicly named suspect, and no proof of life. Yet, what it has yielded, quietly, methodically, and with a surgical precision that has largely escaped the national headlines, is a document not of speculation, not of social media theories, but a physical list. It spans 3 pages, holding 18 to 24 names, each with a photograph attached, carried by an FBI agent from one gun store to another across Tucson, Arizona. This list represents the culmination of months of exhaustive work, of the FBI asking a single question, repeated endlessly in different forms to different individuals in different environments. But always, it was the same fundamental question. Who had access to Nancy Guthrie's private world? This went beyond just her address or her neighborhood. It was about her entire sphere, her home, her cameras, her doorways, her established routines. Who had walked that property and mentally cataloged what they observed? This neighborhood, the Catalina Foothills, is a place where residents speak of leaving their garage doors open, of walking their dogs in the deep of night without a second thought. Here, violent crime is an abstraction, an event that occurs in some other place. It was where an 84-year-old widow could live by herself in a beautiful home nestled within the serene desert hills and feel utterly safe. The median home value here is $652,000. The median age is 56. People move here to retire, to find tranquility, to finally cease looking over their shoulder. Nancy Guthrie did all of those things. And yet, on the night that bled from January 31st into February 1st of this year, someone who possessed an intimate knowledge of how her security systems functioned slipped through her gate, neutralized her cameras, spent 40 minutes inside her home, and then took her. As of this moment, not a single person has been publicly charged. She was tragically wrong to feel safe, not because her community failed her, but because someone had been methodically studying it, a locked room. The critical question isn't what was broken, but what wasn't. Let us begin with the one element that should have stopped him cold. Nancy Guthrie's property is secured by what security professionals have identified as a formidable Diablo wrought-iron security gate, a barrier explicitly engineered to defeat any attempts at forced entry. It is solid, substantial, the type of gate that communicates with cold finality that you are not welcome unless formally invited. That gate was found completely intact when investigators first arrived. There were no indications of forced entry upon it, no compromised hardware, no signs of damage. Now, this single fact introduces a structural enigma for indices, the investigation, because the one thing we know is that Nancy was taken. We have her blood staining the porch, confirmed by DNA analysis to be hers. We have her phone, left abandoned inside the residence. We have her pacemaker, which went silent at 2:28 in the morning, a device that was designed to monitor her cardiac health every minute of every single night. We have both the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department officially designating this case as a kidnapping. Therefore, something or someone bypassed that gate, and it was not accomplished through brute force. The timeline, publicly verified by investigators, reveals what transpired within the windows of time that truly matter. On the evening of January 31st, Nancy had dinner with her daughter, Annie, and her son-in-law, Tommaso Cian, at their residence, close by. Tommaso drove Nancy back to her home. Her garage door was recorded opening at 9:48 that evening and closing at 9:50. That is the final documented moment of normalcy. The sheriff has used the closing of that door as a definitive marker, the point at which Nancy was likely inside and preparing to retire for the night. Then, the ominous sequence began. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, Nancy's Nest doorbell camera went completely dark. This was not a malfunction, nor was it a technical glitch. The camera was deliberately disconnected or disabled. This was a calculated act. Someone who was aware the camera was there and knew precisely what it could document, neutralized it before taking the next step. 25 minutes passed in silence. Then, at 2:12, A separate motion detection system registered a presence, even though it was no longer being captured on footage. The designated recording function had been compromised, but the sensor itself still triggered. Something, or someone, was there. And then, at 2:28, Nancy's pacemaker lost its Bluetooth connection to her phone. The very device that had been syncing with her iPhone every minute of the day suddenly went offline. For one reason, she was being moved away from her phone, far enough that the wireless link was broken. The physical distance between Nancy and her phone was increasing. Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI, who is now a CNN senior law enforcement analyst, has stated directly that this pacemaker detail is critically significant. It confirms for investigators that she was being moved, taken to another location. The phone was stationary, but she was in motion. Here lies the detail that almost no one in the national media is emphasizing with the chilling weight it demands. Authorities confirmed in an interview that Sheriff Chris Nanos granted to the local Tucson station KVOA, a fact later reported by Newsweek, that the suspect spent approximately 40 minutes inside Guthrie's house. Not 40 minutes on the grounds, not 40 minutes at the threshold, inside. The camera was disabled at 1:47. Her pacemaker's connection was severed at 2:28. That window, a span of 41 minutes, is the time frame during which he was inside her home with her. I want you to absorb the gravity of that number. 40 minutes, inside a secured residence in the Ply, dead of night, with a masked gunman, as depicted in the doorbell footage the FBI made public on February 10th. The image shows a man in a ski mask, his arms covered in long sleeves, wearing gloves, carrying a gun in a holster, and a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack. That man, the perpetrator, lingered for 40 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's home before she vanished. This was no panicked abduction. This was not an impulsive eruption of violence. It was a calculated maneuver, executed by someone moving through a space they intimately understood. Someone who knew the placement of objects, what to seek, and the home's layout with enough precision to navigate it in total darkness. Puma County. Sheriff Chris Nanos, speaking to NBC Nightly News, declared that this kidnapping was deliberate. He was unequivocal, stating, quote, "We know why he did this, and we believe that it was targeted." He holds a theory on motive. The sheriff confirmed as much. Yet, he refuses to share it publicly, citing the integrity of the investigation. But the word targeted does a tremendous amount of work in that statement. The implication was clear, though absolute certainty remains elusive. It would be reckless to tell the public, "Yes, don't worry about it." Targeted implies a deliberate choice was made. It implies familiarity. It means a conscious decision was made to descend upon this specific address, with this exact plan, for this particular person. And you do not arrive at that decision by chance. This brings us to the ransom notes and the problem of the knowledge they contained. The demands in this case have attracted overwhelming coverage. The calls for Bitcoin, the $6 million figure, the deadlines that came and went with no proof of life, and the subsequent fraudulent notes that led to an arrest. But the single most crucial element of those original notes, the one that truly matters to this investigation, the element the FBI has guarded most closely, is not about the money. It is about what the author of the notes knew. To be precise, about the contents of the initial ransom communication. 3 media organizations received what were believed to be identical messages. TMZ and 2 local Tucson outlets, KD News 13 and KGN. Those messages held, according to investigators, specific information about Nancy Guthrie's home that had not been released to the public at the moment the note was composed. The FBI special agent supervising the Phoenix office, Heath Jenke, confirmed the note contained details regarding a floodlight at the residence. And concerning Nancy's Apple Watch, these are not details a stranger acquires. The broken floodlight at Nancy's residence, which Fox News captured on film, was visible from the exterior of the house and could conceivably have been observed from outside the property line. The ransom communication itself discussed an Apple Watch and a floodlight. We will not delve into the specifics. It is imperative that we allow this investigation to keep moving forward. But the Apple Watch detail was different. The note, it seems, described the Apple Watch's location, not merely that she owned one, but its precise placement. According to TMZ founder Harvey Levan, who discussed the communication in detail on Fox News' Sean Hannity program, the specificity of that detail is what immediately seized the FBI's attention. In that letter, what he noticed was the mention of both an Apple Watch and a damaged floodlight details now confirmed by the FBI. What he found truly compelling was that while it was known she wore an Apple Watch, photographs of her with her daughter, Savannah, exist with that very watch. The note went further. It specified where the watch was located, the placement of the watch within the house. It was, in his assessment, in a place you would not instinctively think to look. The knowledge was specific. It was internal. KD News anchor Mary Coleman was one of the first journalists to read the note that arrived at her station. On February 4th, she appeared on CNN's Aaron Burnett Out Front and carefully described the note's contents. She said, and her exact words are critical, quote, "A lot of it is information that only someone who is holding her for ransom would know. Some very sensitive information and things that people who weren't there when she was taken captive would know. So, a lot of it is information that only someone who is holding her for ransom would know. Some very sensitive information and things that people who were there when she was taken captive would know." End quote. People who were there when she was taken captive would know. Let that phrase sink in. This is not generic information. This is not the kind of detail that circulates on neighborhood social media groups or gets mentioned in the local paper. This is intelligence that can only be gathered by being physically inside that space at or around the time Nancy was abducted, or from being told in explicit detail by someone who was there. When Coleman and her team reviewed the note, she recalled it took only a couple of sentences for her to begin suspecting it was authentic. The details felt real for a simple reason. They were real. They corresponded to facts that investigators could and did substantiate. That is what elevated this one communication above the static of fraudulent ransom attempts that soon followed. And there was a great deal of static. Just days after the original note surfaced, a California man named Derek Calla was arrested for sending deceptive ransom messages to the Guthrie family. He possessed no inside information. He was simply an opportunist. The FBI arrested him after he sent a text to Annie Guthrie and her husband, essentially asking if they had sent the Bitcoin payment. It is imperative to understand that the fraudulent note and the credible one represent two completely distinct narratives. The apprehension of Calla does nothing to undermine the authenticity of the initial messages, the ones that betrayed knowledge of the Apple Watch. The FBI has never conflated the two, and neither shall we. This leads to the fundamental problem of knowledge that lies at the very heart of this investigation. The original ransom communications contain details that could only have been known through intimate access to the home. The footage from the doorbell camera reveals an individual who understood precisely how and when to neutralize the device. The 40-minute interval spent inside the house points to someone moving through a familiar environment. None of this, not a single element, aligns with the profile of a random stranger who stumbled upon a target and had a stroke of luck. Instead, every piece of evidence is consistent with an individual who possessed prior, specific knowledge, someone who had been inside that home before, or had been given an exhaustive account by a person who had. There are only two conceivable ways to obtain that kind of insight. You visit the considered location yourself, or you are told about it by someone who has. In either circumstance, the path of the investigation leads back to the same nexus, an individual with previous physical access to Nancy Guthrie's residence. The source report paints a stark picture, a worker who was familiar with every single door. Before revealing this next piece of intelligence, I must be unequivocally clear about its origins. What I am about to detail is a claim from a single source, reported by an investigative journalist operating under the name JLR, who is active on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, with the handle @JLR Investigates. While JLR's previous reporting on this case has, on multiple occasions, preceded official confirmation, this particular allegation has not been corroborated by any secondary source I can find. It is being presented here strictly as a source report. The FBI has not validated it. No individual mentioned within it has been charged with a crime. You must keep that context at the forefront of your mind. According to JLR, Nancy Guthrie at one point employed an Iranian healthcare aide who resided in her guest house. This individual worked for Nancy and lived on her property physically situated on the grounds and was eventually dismissed and removed from the Wes premises several years prior to her disappearance. During that person's tenure, they were afforded complete physical access to the entire estate. This wasn't merely the house, but also the grounds, the gate, the door mechanisms, the camera placements, the interior layout, and the very rhythms and routines of an elderly woman living in solitude in the Desert Hills of the Catalina Foothills. This person had observed the utility infrastructure, walked the grounds, and been inside the residence. A reply to JLR's initial post, one among many responses at the time, posed the very question that investigators must have considered the instant this individual's name surfaced. If their residency was long enough, they might have been given a key, a physical key that, following their termination, was never confirmed as returned. At the very minimum, they had sufficient time and access to learn the mechanics of every entry point on that property, the gate, the lock cylinders, and the camera blind spots. It was long enough to etch it into memory, long enough to sketch a map, if only in the mind, containing everything a person would need to know should they ever choose to return. I want to be extremely deliberate here. I do not know, nor can I verify, if this individual was involved in Nancy's disappearance. I am making no accusations. The FBI has not identified them as a person of interest. What I am doing is outlining the chain of investigative reasoning, which proceeds as follows. If a person exists who had prolonged physical access to Nancy Guthrie's home, who was familiar with the cameras in the gate and the interior, and whose employment concluded under contentious circumstances, that individual is precisely the type of person the FBI would feature on a list. They are exactly the kind of person who demands a thorough accounting and complete vetting in an inquiry of this nature. Now, let us connect that single source report to what has been independently confirmed. The FBI did, in fact, compile a list of names. This list contained between 18 and 24 individuals. It included photographs. It was distributed to gun retailers throughout Tucson. The gun store owner who went on record, Philip Martin, co-owner of Armor Bearer Arms on the north side of the city, characterized the names as unusual names he didn't recognize as regular patrons, uncommon names that did not appear in his store's client database to check if any of the individuals on that paper, numbering around 20 or fewer, had visited his shop to purchase a firearm within the last year. The FBI does not materialize a list of 18 to 24 specific people from nothing. That roster was the product of dedicated investigative efforts, of interviews, of sifting through records, of following every lead back to the central question of prior access. Someone constructed that list by identifying persons who had some established connection to Nancy Guthrie's life and who had not yet been definitively ruled out. The names were taken to gun stores because the figure in the doorbell footage was carrying a weapon. The FBI needed to know if anyone on their list had recently acquired a firearm. At Armor Bearer Arms, no matches were made. The list was then carried to other retailers. The question I want to leave with you, and the question the FBI is almost certainly grappling with, the existence of the list is not the mystery. That much is certain. The real question is far deeper. What intricate line of inquiry led investigators to these specific names? What exactly did the FBI surveillance unearth? There is a detail, largely overlooked when it first surfaced, that now demands scrutiny. The FBI, through a collaboration with private industry partners, managed to retrieve thumbnail images from a series of motion-activated cameras that were installed across Nancy Guthrie's property. These devices were positioned to observe her backyard, her side yard, and the area surrounding her swimming pool. Both A, B, C News and CBS News confirmed this development in the weeks preceding her disappearance. These cameras had captured footage of various individuals, family members, landscapers, and pool maintenance workers moving about the grounds. The images were characterized as routine, nothing out of the ordinary, according to the FBI's reported assessment. Yet, the very act of recovering and meticulously analyzing them holds profound significance. Consider for a moment the intimate knowledge a pool worker or a landscaper gains about a property After making regular visits over a period of months, they learn the lay of the land. They become aware of camera placements simply by working around them. They know all the property's access points. They develop a sense of the homeowner's schedule, when she is likely present and when she is not. They understand which areas of the yard are shielded from public view and which are exposed. None of this knowledge has to be acquired with malicious intent. It is information that accumulates organically through the simple execution of their job. And it is precisely this type of operational intelligence that could later be exploited if an individual with a grudge chose to act upon it. The FBI also requested that the Pima County Sheriff's Department engage with Google to retrieve additional doorbell camera footage. Remarkably, even though the Nest device had been physically taken from the home and she lacked an active cloud subscription, authorities were able to pull footage from residual back-end data stored within Google's own systems. This reveals the extraordinary level of digital forensic effort being poured into this investigation. And through that exhaustive work, a portrait of the neighborhood and the property is emerging with ever-increasing clarity. There is one final piece of physical evidence that warrants mention here, as it speaks directly to the question of access. Investigators officially confirmed that a front security camera was missing from the home when they first arrived. Not merely disabled, not just destroyed, but gone, vanished. Someone had physically removed it. That is not the action of an individual who happened upon the property in a state of panic. It is the calculated act of a person who knew that camera was there, understood what it was capable of recording, and arrived with the tools and forethought to take it away, an act that again implies prior knowledge. The list of names. How federal inquiries construct a web of suspects. It is essential to understand how a federal case develops a list of names like this one, because that process reveals the current phase of the investigation. One does not simply begin with 18 names. The process starts with a far broader pool, potentially hundreds of individuals who might have any conceivable link to the victim. These are the people named in initial interviews, figures seen on neighborhood security footage, contractors who performed work at the home, and individuals connected through any social or professional network. Investigators cast a wide net, and then they begin to methodically narrow it. They pull public records. They conduct preliminary interviews. They search for anyone who cannot properly account for their whereabouts during the critical time frame. They probe for inconsistencies in personal timelines. They seek out those who, when their names are run through the system, generate hits: a past criminal record, an entry in some obscure database, a financial transaction that seems out of place, a travel itinerary that conflicts with their given alibi. They systematically eliminate those with no clear involvement, and gradually, the pool of potential persons of interest contracts. So, when the FBI arrives at gun stores across Tucson, holding 3 pages containing 18 to 24 names, it's a sign that they have already conducted months of painstaking preliminary groundwork. This list is not the investigation's starting point. It is a direct result of it. These names are the individuals who, after all the initial rounds of elimination, have yet to be definitively cleared. They are the people who demand a very specific, additional investigative step in this instance, a firearms purchase check to either escalate or terminate the line of inquiry they represent. Early in this investigation, FBI Director Kash Patel indicated that there were persons of interest already under scrutiny. This terminology is both legally and investigatively specific. A person of interest is not yet a suspect. No charges have been filed against them. They have not been publicly named, but they have been flagged as someone whose connection to the case requires a thorough explanation. The FBI is actively asking questions about them, and in a scenario where the perpetrator brandished a visible firearm, confirming whether any person of interest recently bought that specific model of weapon is a perfectly logical and crucial investigative measure. Now, consider the circle of individuals who had physical access to Nancy Guthrie's world. We begin with her family. The family has been unequivocally cleared. Sheriff Nanos stated publicly, and I quote, "The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious. They are the victims in this ordeal, and they have been 100% cooperative with us. They've done everything we've asked. We've taken their phones and their computers and their homes and their cars and talked to them at length. Look, they are victims. They are not suspects. The daughter, Annie, her son Cameron, and her son-in-law Tommaso Cion, the last person to see Nancy that night, had been cleared. With the people who had the most intimate, familial access to the home ruled out, the scope of the investigation exploded outward to encompass everyone else. And who was everyone else? The list included domestic staff, healthcare aides, and individuals hired for medical support and medication, oversight, daily assistance, landscaping, and pool maintenance. The FBI managed to retrieve thumbnail images from motion-activated cameras positioned around the property, with lenses trained on her backyard, side yard, and swimming pool. These cameras, according to reports from ABC News and CBS News, had documented family members, landscapers, and pool service workers in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. The FBI now possessed those images, scrutinizing every individual who set foot on that property. The search widened to include contractors and laborers from nearby construction projects. Agents recovered footage from a camera on Camino Real, a secondary road leading out of the Catalina Foothills, which neighbors informed Fox News had not been examined in the initial sweep. It became clear that cameras in the vicinity had been overlooked by the first wave of investigators. Every vehicle, every face, every individual captured in any footage from that area in the time before the abduction was now a vital data point. Former tenants, past neighbors, anyone with a documented link to the address, anyone who, for any reason, legitimate or otherwise, had been on the property or in a position to observe it, was now under a microscope. The FBI was not compiling this list haphazardly. It was being constructed with painstaking methodology, and the list they circulated to gun stores was the result of months of this meticulous work. The agency returned to building its map of access, and this is the state of the investigation today, at Week 8. It would be tempting to view 52 days without an arrest or a named suspect as a sign that the case had stalled, that investigators were chasing shadows, that the trail had gone cold. But that framework is entirely wrong, and the evidence of just how wrong it is surfaced only this past week. News Nation's Brian Entin, who has been on the ground in Tucson from the very start and has consistently delivered the most sourced, on-the-record reporting of anyone on this story, confirmed through his sources that the FBI had returned to Nancy's Catalina Foothills neighborhood. This was not for a general canvass, but for pointed questions about specific addresses and particular individuals. Entin outlined two primary lines of inquiry that agents are now actively pursuing within the community. The first centers on a property near the home that was vacated and entirely emptied out in the period just before her disappearance. A presence in that neighborhood had vanished. The FBI is determined to learn everything about who occupied that home, the exact timing of their departure, and what they might have witnessed or known about the house and its routines. He noted, "Some of the things that I know that they're talking about is, there's one neighbor that moved out before Nancy disappeared, and they have been asking more questions about that situation. The second avenue of investigation is the one that is truly arresting," Entin stated, and I will quote him. "Precisely because the details are critical, I found this to be particularly interesting. There are several houses that are under construction in the neighborhood, and they are asking specifically for names of contractors and workers who were working in the neighborhood on those houses, on those construction projects. And I'm talking about specifics. Like, they want the names of all the contractors and workers who are working on those houses, not company, letterheads, not the names of contracting firms or roofing outfits or landscaping companies. They wanted individual human names. There's several houses that are under construction in the neighborhood, and they are asking specifically for names of contractors and workers who were working in the neighborhood on those houses, on those construction projects. And I'm talking about specifics. Like they want the names of all the contractors, first and last name of every single person who had been present on those construction sites within the relevant time frame. The FBI is seeking a complete manifest, a full catalog of every person who had a physical presence in that neighborhood during the weeks and months leading up to February. First, why is this so significant? Consider what construction workers on a residential job site inherently possess. They have time. They have a sustained physical presence. They have unobstructed views over fences and into adjacent properties. They develop an intimate familiarity with the neighborhood's cadence when residents leave and return, when gates swing open, when lights flicker on and off. They are simply there, present at times, when most homeowners are completely unaware that anyone is watching. A construction site provides one of the most effective observation platforms in any residential area, and it draws virtually no notice because the workers are supposed to be there. Former FBI Special Agent Steve Moore underscored this very point during an appearance on NTEEN's program. This kind of access offers the perfect cover for surveillance. Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Kroll, who managed high-risk situations in Arizona for decades, explained to Parade magazine that an unoccupied or a nearby under-occupied property could function, in his view, as a staging ground or operational base for a perpetrator, or even a team. It would be a place to stay, as he put it, beneath the notice of the community while monitoring the neighborhood's rhythm, tracking the comings and goings of residents, and learning their routines and schedules, including Nancy's. One might use a vacant or scarcely inhabited space to build a profile of the target without ever raising an alarm. An investigative reporter, JLR, would soon add a found-eye, precise location to this theory. His reporting on X revealed that the FBI paid a visit to a property under construction at the intersection of Camino Escalante and Camino Miraval, mere steps from Nancy Guthrie's residence. On several different occasions, he noted, federal agents questioned construction workers at the location, inspected storage sheds on the premises, and conducted a walkthrough of the forecase, entire construction grounds. While this information comes from a single source, JLR, on X, it aligns perfectly with what Brian Anton was able to confirm independently. The FBI is meticulously compiling a list of every person present in that neighborhood, down to the names of individual laborers. Former FBI agent Steve Moore provided the clearest interpretation of what this return to the area signifies from an investigative perspective. He was blunt. Obviously, it means they're retracing steps. But he was careful to add that in a federal case, retracing one's steps is not a backward maneuver. It is a sign of progress. It suggests that something new in the case files a fresh tip, another piece of evidence, an unforeseen connection within the data, has cast a new light on a person or place that had been previously examined, causing something once overlooked to now appear significant. In this investigation, the FBI has been navigating what can only be described as a torrent of information. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who has remained one of the most reliable analysts on this matter, stated in recent weeks that the investigation is, in her estimation, red hot. The Bureau is managing a greater number of investigative leads in this single case than in almost any other it has ever undertaken. The sheer volume is staggering. The difficulty isn't a scarcity of information. It is isolating the critical signal from the overwhelming noise. And when an agency this saturated with data returns to a specific neighborhood 8 weeks in and begins requesting the names of individual workers, you are witnessing them closing in on that signal. It is the convergence of a key grievance and the criminal act itself. Let me now weave together the threads that the FBI's own behavior has revealed and articulate the central theory as clearly as possible, while distinguishing between what is confirmed and what remains speculation. Confirmed, the property's gate was not breached. Confirmed, the intruders were inside the home for 40 minutes. Confirmed, the ransom letter included information that necessitated inside knowledge of the residents. Confirmed, the FBI has a list of 18 to 24 individuals whom they are actively vetting in connection with weapons purchases. Confirmed, the names on that list were described as unusual and uncommon by the firearms dealer who reviewed them. Confirmed, the FBI is demanding the names of every construction worker active in the vicinity. Confirmed, the FBI is making inquiries about a neighbor who relocated just before Nancy's disappearance. Confirmed, a construction site at the corner of Camino Escalante and Camino Miraval was visited by the FBI on multiple occasions. From a single source, but consistent with the context, a former live-in employee, had complete physical access to Nancy's main house and guest house before being dismissed. From a single source, this individual is of Iranian descent. The question that this pattern of evidence forces us to ask is this: is there a person or persons within the FBI's scope of investigation who possess prolonged, intimate access to Nancy Guthrie's home, who left that position on hostile terms, yet retained crucial operational knowledge of the property, and could have either executed the abduction personally or furnished a third party with the detailed intelligence needed to carry it out? This is the very question the FBI's own movements are posing. Every measure they've taken, the list of names, the visits to the gun store, the focus on individual workers, the inquiry into vacant properties, the repeated visits to the construction site, all of it serves as the operational pursuit of the answer to that one overriding question. They are constructing a map of access, searching for the precise point where access and motive intersect. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, a veteran of 25 years in federal law enforcement, has presented her analysis on the Dade News Nation Brian Enton platform, proposing that the perpetrator in this case likely had assistance. The doorbell, camera evidence, the disabling of security systems, the 40-minute window of operation, these details suggest a level of planning and coordination that is rarely the work of a single individual. It suggests one person to provide the intelligence, another to carry out the act, and perhaps a third to offer logistical support. If this theory holds true, if this was a contracted or coordinated crime rather than the act of a lone offender, then the question of inside access becomes critically important because an operation of this complexity demands an intelligent source. It requires someone who could say, here is the floor plan. Here is how to disable the camera system. Here is her bedtime. Here is how the gate operates. Here is what you need to find inside. That briefing had to have occurred, and the person who delivered it had, at some point, been inside Nancy Guthrie's home, knows this. They have always understood this, and the access map they are constructing, name by name, worker by worker, neighbor by neighbor, is a cold and methodical process of elimination, winnowing down the possibilities until only those who could be the perpetrator are left. January 11th, the trial run. Here is the last piece of the puzzle, one that only crystallized with unnerving clarity very recently. The Guthrie family issued a new public statement this past weekend, pleading with the community, anyone in the Tucson area, anyone who might possess any fragment of information to scour their memories, re-examine their cameras, look through their texts and observations from two specific windows of time. Two, specifically, January 31st into February 1st, the night of the abduction, and the late evening of January 11th. January 11th, 3 weeks before Nancy vanished. Why that specific date? Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed that very question, at least in part, in an interview with KOL on March 23rd of this year. We can state with certainty that this individual, with or without the backpack, was present at that house on January 11th. His precise words were, "We do believe that. Something occurred on January 11th, and that's with the FBI's analysis of the equipment and digital stuff they've done." He would not elaborate. He offered no further details, but the reference to FBI digital analysis, an analysis of equipment and digital data, strongly implies that camera metadata, device logs, or forensic data from the Widening property's electronic systems has revealed activity connected to January 11th. Activity so significant that the sheriff was compelled to confirm it publicly. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who has been observing this case with the analytical depth one would expect from a career professional, examined that family statement immediately and arrived at the conclusion investigators have almost certainly already reached. In a post on X, she stated that the reference to January 11th points to what law enforcement calls a trial run. The suspect appeared on Nancy Guthrie's porch on January 11th, conducting reconnaissance, testing the approach, the cameras, the response system. Then, satisfied that the operation was viable, they returned 20 days later, fully equipped to execute it. That interpretation is consistent with a separate piece of investigative reporting from earlier in the case. ABC News cited, unnamed sources familiar with the investigation, suggesting that one of the doorbell camera images, released by the FBI, the one showing the suspect without the backpack, may have been captured on a different date than the others. At the time, the Pima County Sheriff's Department countered that characterization, saying there were no date or timestamps on the images and that any assertion they were taken on different dates was pure speculation. But the question that report raised, was this person here before, has now been answered by the sheriff himself. Yes, something occurred on January 11th. Yes, the FBI possesses digital proof of it. A trial run fundamentally alters the profile of this crime, dramatically. It reveals that this was not an impulsive act, not a crime of opportunity, not the work of someone who heard a name on the news and decided to test their luck. This was an individual who came once to confirm what they already believed about the property, the layout, the cameras, the points of entry. They only returned when their confidence was absolute. That degree of operational discipline is built upon a foundation of prior knowledge. One does not conduct a trial run at a property to which they've never had access. One conducts a trial run at a property they already know intimately, to verify that what they know remains accurate, that the camera is still in the same position, that the gate mechanism has not changed, that the routines once observed are still being followed. That prior knowledge had to come from somewhere, and the prior knowledge FBI has been dedicating 8 weeks to tracing its precise origin. The FBI requested every name, every contractor, every former employee, every neighbor who relocated, every person who drove through that neighborhood, worked in it, or watched it. From a scaffold, a parked car, or a guest house window, they are assembling the complete access map of Nancy Guthrie's world, the full portrait of every individual who was ever present within it and could have carried knowledge of it away with them. Somewhere on that map, among one of those names, in one of those faces on one of those 3 pages, is the person who either walked through that gate themselves or, at some point, picked up a telephone and told someone else the door will be open. Here is where the camera is. Here is the gate. Here is what she keeps inside. Come at night, she will be alone. That conversation took place somewhere, sometime, between someone who knew and someone who acted. The investigation is now closing in on that moment. If you know anything, and I mean anything at all, about who had access to Nancy Guthrie's world, the tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's 1-800-2255-324. You can also submit tips online at tips.fbi.gov or call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The reward for any information that could lead to Nancy Guthrie's recovery or an arrest now stands at a combined $1.2 million. Her family is offering $1 million. The FBI has contributed $100,000, and an anonymous source has added another $100,000. Nancy Guthrie remains missing. It has been 52 days. She is 84 years old, depends on a pacemaker, and requires daily medication for a heart condition. With every passing day, the weight of this unresolved reality grows heavier. It is a burden her family, her daughters, Savannah and Annie, and her son, Cameron, carries from the moment they wake. But they refuse to surrender hope, and the FBI shares their resolve. In a statement released this past weekend, the family's words echoed a sentiment the Tucson community has heard from them for 8 long weeks. Someone out there knows something. Someone in this city holds a piece of the puzzle. No detail is considered too insignificant, no memory too faint. The FBI is meticulously assembling a map of events, and the question that hangs in the air is whether a person on that map will come forward before the investigation finds them. The Pima County Sheriff recently remarked that the investigation has, quote, so much in front of us. He expressed confidence that investigators are working with solid evidence, adamantly refusing to label this a cold case. The FBI's Jennifer Coffindaffer concurs. She described the Bureau as drinking from a fire hose of incoming leads, while the Guthrie family, Savannah, Annie, Cameron issued a statement this week, pleading with the community for its renewed focus. No detail too small, they repeated. They are convinced that the people of Tucson and southern Arizona possess the critical information needed to bring this to a close. They have not wavered in their belief that their mother can be brought home. To maintain that level of faith after 52 agonizing days is nothing short of extraordinary, as is the investigation that continues to unfold around her disappearance.